This is TWiT.
Let us talk about, I think, one of the big stories of the week. And it did seem coincidentally timed with Apple's announcement that they were abandoning Intel, Microsoft abandoning its retail stores.
I don't think it was connected to Apple.
No, of course not.
But I do think it was connected to end of Microsoft's fiscal year and Amy Hood looking at the books going, oh, why are we still doing Microsoft stores? They never make any money.
Right. So it would be mistake. One of the counter arguments to this whole Apple Silicon thing, which I didn't bring up until the...
Well, actually, so you should hold on to that because we're going to talk about that again.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it took a week or two for the reality distortion.
Yes. Right. You need that kind of morning after moment. Calm down. No, you do, right?
But I will tie it when we get there to the closing of the stores. Because it feels to me there's a larger trend that we can talk about. But it has nothing to do with Apple, really.
Yeah. The Mary Jo might listen to it.
I might not. I'm not making any promises.
It is the case that those stores looked a lot like Apple's stores. Sometimes
they were right next to them.
Blocks away.
Yes.
and one was hard pressed not to make the comparison between the throngs in the Apple store and the sounds of high chaparral dust bunnies blowing in the wind.
Like to be right at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in America, where all you can hear is like a sign slowly creaking. No, the Microsoft store, for good or bad, was born out of an age of Apple envy at Microsoft. There's no doubt about it. And they were going after all kinds of consumer products, including hardware at the time, Zune and Windows Phone, and obviously the Xbox stuff, which still exists. But and then Surface came along 3 years into that or whatever it was, but. Microsoft and Apple are both humongous companies. They seem to swap spots on the biggest market cap, blah, 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 whatever. But they serve very different markets, even though they're both big tech. There's a little bit of crossover, obviously, still. Surface and the MacBook line, would be one. But Apple is all about consumer excitement and hardware and what's the new shiny bauble, and Microsoft isn't. And that's a hard thing to sell in a store, It
is.
You get people coming in playing Xbox games after school and going home.
Yep.
So just a different kind of business.
Yeah. So they're taking a pre-tax charge of $450 million, which I was actually thinking it would have been even bigger than that. Because I think they had hundreds of stores worldwide at this point, right? Like I think the only one outside the U.S. was the London store, but they had a lot of stores.
Remember when they shut down Nokia and it was 7 point something billion? It was a big number, 8 point billion, whatever, 8 point whatever. A lot of that was tied up in Nokia's infrastructure, which is both manufacturing facilities, but also the people that work there, right? So they were swallowing a lot of pension plans and healthcare and whatever, all those costs. Microsoft, one of the big things that Microsoft did, and we have to say, I think in a really positive sense, is they're retaining every single person that worked at those Microsoft stores. And they'll be switched over to what they were essentially probably doing already, which is remote support.
Right.
For Microsoft.
They've been closed for COVID anyway, so.
They have.
Yeah.
So they just never reopened, right? After that.
I mean, their costs would, imagine if they laid off those folks.
I know.
The write-off would be astronomical, for one thing. But it's also nice that in the midst of a pandemic, Microsoft is not laying people off.
I had a nice older woman call me on a Sunday, irate about this, because she had paid for some sort of one-on-one training that they did.
Yeah.
And I said, well, the same people can do it, but they'll be doing it now over Skype or something like that. Yeah. And she said, well, I want to be in, you need the hands-on.
Yeah.
That's gone.
Right. Hopefully in that case, what Microsoft will do is the same thing that concert venues should be doing, travel organizations should be doing, is just giving you the option to
refund,
get your money back. But I don't know how they're handling that.
Yeah, I don't either, and that's what I said. I said, if you wanted a refund, they should give you one. I think it would be worth a call.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yep.
It is hard to imagine though now when Microsoft introduces new PCs like new Surface devices or the Surface Duo phone, the new Xbox consoles. Like if you're a regular consumer, where do you go to see these? Because are you just going to buy it online and then say I'll return it if I don't like it?
By the way, I think most people do that already. But
do you really? I
think a lot. Maybe not most, but many people do. I've done that a tons of times. But I think most countries probably have some place that's like, in our case, Best Buy or Fnac in France or, well, no, I mean, I'm not saying it's great, but it's a place. I mean,
I know, it's so bad.
If you want to go and see computers on a desk and compare them side by side, I mean, that's where you go, or for better or worse. I agree it's not necessarily great depending on the location, but that doesn't excuse this or whatever. But it's, can you imagine how much money this thing must have been losing? This business was unsustainable before the pandemic. Obviously, when this thing happens, it made it even worse. I suspect that is what pushed this to happen maybe even a year earlier than it might have otherwise or whatever.
True.
Yeah. The timing was weird, and the way it kind of came out was weird. But
it was weird. Yeah.
It's unfortunate. It was unexpected, and for us in the Microsoft world, it came right on the heels of Mixer being killed.
I know. Yeah.
And of course, the Apple stuff. And we're all, it's like, how many more times can you? It's like those Rocky movies where he punches you and you actually lift off the ground. It's like, I don't know if you've ever punched anyone. That's impossible, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah. Even the New York flagship store, like I went in there a few times after it opened. I can walk there from here. Yep. And I like when I went in, I'm like, it's nice, but
there were people in there. There were people in there.
There were mostly people who worked there or kids after school, like Paul said, playing Xbox on the second floor. Yeah.
But you know what? The other thing to mention is Microsoft is going to keep 4 facilities open, not as retail stores, but as what they call it. I think it's a customer experience centers. Mm-hmm. And for people unfamiliar with how Microsoft works, they have hundreds, maybe thousands of field offices all over the world. So if you think about the country, there's a big field office in New York. There's one in Chicago, Boston, everywhere. And here in Pennsylvania, the big field office is outside of Philadelphia, so it's kind of like halfway between where I live and Philly. But they have them in Europe. I've been to a ton of these things, and it's these customer experience. So that's for sales and support of business customers, that kind of thing. The Customer Experience Center, as I understand it, there'll be one in Sydney, one in London, which was at is it Oxford Circus or Camden, or where, I think Oxford Circus location?
Yeah, I think it is.
Yep. In New York that you mentioned. Yep. And also one on the Redmond campus, right? Will be a place where you can go and see Surface devices all around out and, have informational kiosks. You won't be able to buy anything there.
Right.
But they'll presumably have classes and other sort of in-person events. So they're depending on where, if you live in one of 4 places on the entire planet, you're all set.
Right.
It's not 100% clear what these things are for, though, or whether they'll even be open to consumers. But Mary Jo and I have been to that store in New York a bunch of times to do shows, and I could imagine that happening in the future.
Yeah, they probably will keep that space open, right? Like especially the very top floor where we did a presentation before. And I'm like, they could use it as conference space, meeting space. When they first introduced the HoloLens, they did demos of the HoloLens for the press there. Remember that? In like
Frisco,
a private.
They did like a mini tour thing. That's where they had that event. Not an event, but you could, the little meeting or whatever. I mean, I bet. I mean, I don't mean to say like mark my words. There'll be a future Windows Weekly, but I bet there will be. Right? Sometime in the next year or so. Yeah,
it could be. Yep.
We'll see. But
because they need somewhere to show HoloLens. They need somewhere to.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. They do. And I guess I wasn't really surprised. Like I thought they would have closed these stores a long time ago when it was kind of obvious they weren't really gaining traction. But now that they're closed, I'm like, okay, so now where are people going to go who want to see this expensive hardware up close? I know.
Yeah, you're not going to see a HoloLens at Best Buy.
You're not. Yeah. You're not.
For sure. So I don't know. I always felt that, like I said, the companies are so different. And you could go to a typical mall. Microsoft was always brazen enough to put it right across from the Apple store. And, you see over on the Apple side, you see like 100 people waiting in line to get their iPhone serviced. And then on the Microsoft side, you see some kids playing an Xbox. And it was like, stark. It was kind of stark how different it was. But again, their businesses are so different. They never should have put themselves in that position. And that was just a fool's errand to try to. Yeah. It was that whole era of 10, 15 years ago where they were trying to be like Apple.
Yeah, Steve Ballmer was running Microsoft when they opened the stores, right? They hired David Porter to be the head of all stores. Like it was this big thing. Like we're going all in on retail, and we're gonna like try to go right after Apple, right?
Yeah, very expensive. Retail square footage is incredibly expensive.
When they opened it, did they have Surfaces?
No.
They had no hardware to sell of their own. It was all for...
Well, but it was... So the issue at the time was, I don't remember exactly where we were with different stores, but Best Buy was obviously around because it's still around. It's possible CompUSA was still an ongoing concern. I don't remember. But, the problem with Best Buy, and it is a problem depending on where you live, is like you go in there and the PC section looks like it was last updated 15 years ago. There were rodents scurrying around on the ground and, the lights are flickering. And, it's not necessarily a great place. Apple has those little store-in-a-store type things. I think Microsoft would be smart to do that with whatever local big box store they can. Mm-hmm. You can see actually Costco's another place that has a decent little electronics area as well. Mm-hmm. So, there's things that can be done to make that better. But I will say the Microsoft Store, it's not just about Microsoft hardware, right? One of the things I think that was nice about it is you could go in and see a bunch of different computers. And, of course, back in the day, they had the signature PC stuff, which I thought was very important. Mm-hmm. That kind of drifted off.
They had all the phones. After they dropped Windows Phone, they started having other companies' phones. Android phones were in there, right?
Including, the Samsung phones were in there. And So, boy, I don't know. It's too bad. It was a nice, clean place. Yeah. Where things were kept up and looked good. And I think that's part of the appeal of the Apple Store. You go in there and you feel, it's museum safe, it's curated and nice. And, and we didn't have that on the PC side. Now we don't again. So
a lot of people also talked about using the store to return stuff, right? Like they said, I liked going in there and returning stuff physically in the store, or if something was wrong, be able to talk to somebody in the store, see if I could fix it. So now they don't have that. I mean, you have it over remotely, I guess. But
who I haven't heard from is anyone who said, "Good, I went in that store and had a terrible experience. I'm glad."
Me neither. I've never heard.
No one has said this. Same. The people, because if they existed, I would hear from them. But everyone who has written is, "Oh, this is sad. I really liked that place, or I had a really good customer service experience there." You're not going to be able to replicate that online. It's too bad.
It's too bad.
Yeah.
So sad.